Our next talk will be by Claudia Allende on competition under social interactions and the design of education policies. I'm really excited for this talk. This is a really amazing empirical work that's a tour de force in combining a lot of issues that are not typically considered in school choice, including peer effects and also market competition and pricing.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Natalie, for your presentation. I'm working now also with the government of Chile and using your algorithm. So it was great to understand all the details and the story behind how it was implemented. So it was very interesting. Okay, I'm going to present this paper. This is my job market paper. This is a long paper. I have never presented it in this format, so I will give you an overview of the paper, but I invite you to email me or reach out if you're interested, and also on my website you can see the whole paper. Yeah, so before starting the paper, I would like to introduce 3 key concepts that are going to help us understand what's the motivation and the research question that I want to answer in this paper. Especially because, sorry, I didn't tell you the title. So the title of this presentation is Competition Under Social Interactions and the Design of Education Policies. Okay, so here in the title, I presented like many words that I want to be specific and clear about what I am thinking about when I talk about these topics, and then I will tell you about what's the research question of the paper. Okay, so first I will be talking about education markets, and I'm very happy that Natalie already introduced you to education markets in Latin America that may look very different to what you are used to in countries like the US or in European countries. These are countries that first have a significant degree of school choice and relevant levels of privatization. In this paper, I will be working in Peru. Peru is different to Chile in the sense that we don't have a centralized application for schools, but it has also very high levels of privatization. And this privatization is also quite recent. So the share of schools that are private went from 23% to more than 50% in less than 20 years. Second, these are markets in which there are significant degrees of vertical and horizontal differentiation. With vertical differentiation, I mean that there's a lot of difference in the quality that these schools provide, and there's a whole spectrum of value added or test scores, depending on which measure you look at, that different schools provide. And also in education, you have this another important component that is the horizontal differentiation, in the sense that the space and the geography of the cities will imply that how we perceive different schools will be different for different people. So if I live in one side of the city and you live in the other side, how I perceive a school that is next to me will be very different of how you perceive a school that is very far from you because you don't live close to that school. Yeah. Second, throughout the presentation, I will be talking about school quality. And quality is a very complex concept in education markets. And when I talk about quality, I will think out specifically about what is the school effectiveness to improve the academic outcomes of the kids that go to that school, independent of the peers that go to that school. So it would be, imagine the treatment effect of attending a specific school, but without taking into account who is going to that school. It doesn't matter, like you can randomize the students that are attending the school, and you should be able to recover one treatment effect that is independent from them. Yeah, and third, I will be talking about social interactions. And when I talk about social interactions, I am thinking about the externalities that are generated by the composition of the students in the school. So related to my previous definition, there's an externality that is the classroom peer effects. So for example, you may learn more if you go to a school with certain type of kids. Second, you can have other implications that are, for example, for the labor market. So it's not that your kid is learning more, it is that when you go to a school with certain type of kids, you may have better opportunities in the labor market in the future. Or finally, it can also be, the social interactions can also be externalities that are related to preferences. So maybe your kid doesn't learn more in the school with a certain type of kids. Your kid doesn't have more labor market opportunities, but you like going to a school with those type of kids. Okay, so now that I introduced these 3 concepts, and I hope that they are clear for you, I will tell you what is this paper about. So I want to answer 2 research questions. The first one is that I want to understand what is the impact that the social interactions have on equilibrium market outcomes in a context in which you have an important share of schools that are private. And when I am thinking about market outcomes, I am thinking about the production function of education. So I want to understand how the production functions change changes when you have a different social composition and the social interactions are affecting these social compositions in equilibrium. And then I also want to think about the impact that it has on the supply decisions of the schools. And when I talk about the supply, I am thinking about both the price that is provided in equilibrium and the quality. And second, I want to take these that are more like academic research questions to a policy discussion. And I want to understand what are the policy implications of social interactions in school choice. And for this, I want to first think about policy evaluation. So in the paper, I look at different policies and I try to understand how the policy design interacts with the fact that parents are choosing schools, taking into account the social interactions. And second, I want to, and here I don't want to overclaim what the paper is doing, but I give a discussion trying to think about optimal policy design when you take the social interactions into account. Of course, this is something that is hard to do, but I think the paper provides some insights on how to think about optimal policy design in this setting. Well, and then the approach that I will take is that first I will develop and estimate a model of competition with social interactions, and I will be very careful about the research design because a lot of empirical problems and identification problems will emerge when you try to estimate this model. And second, I will do counterfactual policy simulations. And here I will try to evaluate the policies using an equity and efficiency framework. And then, as I mentioned, I will try to use the understanding of the mechanisms that govern the equilibrium outcomes to improve policy design. Okay, so now I want to give you an overview of the model in the paper. This model is, well, it's long and has a lot of details, but I hope that this very simplified version of it will give you the main intuition in the paper. Okay, so I am thinking of a setting in which you have families in the market. And here you will have families that are of high SES and families of low SES. So the high SES families have darker dots or circles here. And as you can see, they are located in this linear city, and there is some segregation in the city in the sense that higher SES families tend to be located at the left of the city. And in this problem, you will have two schools that their locations are fixed, and you will have one school that is private that charges a price, and a school that is public that is free. And again, as you can see, there's a relation between the spatial distribution of the families in the city and the distribution of the schools. And for this example, I will simplify the problem, and I will only allow the schools to differ on their prices. However, in the model, in the paper, you can see that schools will be choosing both quality and prices. So I will assume that both schools are exactly the same. They both have mu, that is my definition of quality, that is quality independent of the peer effects. And however, the private school will charge a price of 1, and the public school will charge a price 0. Okay, so how will families sort in the schools into this market? Naturally, the families that are closer to a private school will tend to go there, and the families that are closer to a public school will go to the public school, because families care about the quality, the price, but also the distance, and no one wants to travel very far. Yeah, okay, so what happens here with this equilibrium? Here I am assuming that there are no social interactions. So all the families care about are the quality, price, and distance, and they don't put attention to the social composition of the kids in the school. However, as you can see, and this is in gray, the SIG term here, this will represent the socioeconomic composition. It's expressed in terms of deviations from the mean, but it will express the composition of the kids in the school. And what will happen is that in practice, this composition will also contribute to learning. And here I am assuming that higher SES families have a positive effect on the learning of the kids. So then when I measure the value added that includes both the quality and the social interactions, I will see that there is, there is some segregation or different or gap in the results, in the sense that as high SES kids tend to go to a private school, these schools will have a higher value added only because of the social composition of the school. Okay, what can happen once I allow the schools to take into or to incorporate the SES composition of the families in the school? So now I will put this term C in black, and if you think what can happen in this market is that here you have family 3, that is a family. Here you have if you compare the two schools, you see that the private and the public schools now have more differentiation, in the sense that they now don't only differ in their location and their price, but they also differ in the composition of the kids in the school, and if the families value that, now they may value the private school more than the public school. And that will give the private school some local market power to increase the prices a little bit without the risk of losing the families in the school. Because now it's a school that has some more desirable characteristic, and this is an assumption, of course, that I am thinking that all the families want to go to to a school with the higher SES peers. Okay, so now this school, can increase the price up to 1.5%, and it's not losing market share. However, if these schools thinks that how they can increase their profits a little bit, they may realize that if they increase the price a bit more, and they increase the price up to 2, now family 2, that is a family that is low SES and is more price sensitive, may not be willing to go to a private school anymore, because even though they have to travel to a public school, now the private school turns to be too expensive for them. What happens after that is that family 2 switches to a public school. That changes again the composition of the families in the school, and it increases the differentiation even more. So the private school may decide to strategically engage into this increase in the price. And now family 4, that was going to a public school because it was closer to their house, may realize that the private school, again, not only has it has a higher price and it's farther away, but now the differentiation in terms of the peers, it's even larger than it was originally. So now family 4 decides to go to a private school, and then you end up with the 2 schools having the same market shares, but the private school being able to sustain a much higher price than the one that it had in the equilibrium without the peer effects, and also increasing even much more the differentiation in the value added between the 2 schools. Okay, in this example, I am ignoring the quality composition, and of course the problem gets much more complicated, and in the paper, I come up with some solutions to solve these problems relatively fast. So if you are interested in how these equilibriums are computed, I encourage you to see a paper. Okay, and just to give you a second overview, what I try, as I said, I'm not only interested in understanding these different mechanisms and understanding how the model is estimated, I also want to understand policy. And how can the social interactions interact with policy design? I will take a policy that is very common or very discussed in education, that is the targeted vouchers, and it was implemented in Chile massively, and there's an important discussion in Peru on whether it should be implemented or not. And this is a policy in which you have an assignment rule in which you will provide some kids with a voucher to go, and some poor kids with a voucher to go to private schools. That is something that in Peru doesn't exist. You have to pay out of pocket, or if not, you cannot go to a private school. Okay, so what I will use, and this will be also part of my research design, is that I will use a scholarship that is provided by an NGO in Peru, in which there is continuity in the assignment of this scholarship. So if you look, for example, at the program evaluation of a scholarship like this, you can exploit this continuity to look at the impact, of the scholarship at the individual level in terms of the choices that families are making. So I find that they choose schools with higher value added, schools with better peers in terms of their education, and also schools with peers with higher income. However, what this evaluation is missing is what can happen in equilibrium. And the problem is that when we implement a policy like this, you're probably, as in Chile, they implemented it at a large scale. And there are many things that you're missing here that are the equilibrium responses. So what can happen in equilibrium? First is that there's if everyone now, or like all the poor kids are exposed to this policy, the sorting in the system can change, and there can be a change in the peers that can also affect the value added that I am counting as fixed in the example that I previously showed you. Second, there can be supply responses. So what this policy is doing in practice is that when you're providing a voucher to some families, you're changing their price sensitivity. And that implies that the schools may respond to this because their pricing decisions will depend on the price sensitivities of the families around them. And finally, you can also think that the quality can also change because now the families, as you are changing the sensitivity in prices by providing their scholarship, the incentives to provide quality may also change. Okay, so these are like all possible consequences of doing a policy like this that you will miss if you don't take into account the social interactions.
Thank you, Claudia. And so we're actually at time for your talk. Is there any last thing you want to tell us?
Yes, no, I wanted to, sorry, like I got confused with but I want to show you the counterfactuals, So basically what I do in the paper is that, as I mentioned, I use this model and the understanding of the mechanisms to understand how to design the targeted vouchers and what would be implication of implementing something like that in Peru. And I want to highlight basically what I find is that I find that if you ignore the social interactions, you are overestimating the effects for the high-income families and underestimating the effects for the low-income families. You're also missing huge distributional implications of a policy like this, in the sense that even though the policy on average may not look that different to the one in which you ignore the social interactions, the distributional implications are very different once you take the social interactions into account. And in particular, even though some low-income families will win or will benefit a lot from this policy, there are many ones that will be hurt more than you would have assumed if you ignore the social interactions. And I invite you to look at the paper in which I look at 6 different education policies, and I look at them through this equity and efficiency framework that allows us to finally convert to this what I call the optimal policy design, in which you can expand the possibilities that families have when you use the insights of the model to understand how to combine policies in an optimal way.